API monetization is one of the most important things to consider as you develop out a digital product or service, especially if you are providing a business-to-business service as a software platform. There are various different strategies that can be employed to monetize different APIs and services that you offer. But some monetization strategies have inherent benefits as well as inherent weaknesses that need to be considered when you pick the best monetization strategy for your digital offerings. We will consider the example of SMS messaging, right? So consider a business that makes available a digital API for sending out text messages to mobile phone numbers. And this service runs on the internet and can be accessed by people who wish to send SMS messages as part of their applications. There are different ways that the business that operates this API could go about monetizing it. They could, for example, have a subscription system in which there are users on their website and they have a dashboard where they have to sign up with their email address and log in to the dashboard where they can then enter payment information, and then the API business, the service provider, can charge this person's credit card on a monthly basis according to how much the user has actually benefited from the API, right? How many messages were sent. Or in a more common monetization pattern, there will be a preset package, and the person who uses the API can pick, for example, to pay $20 per month in exchange for a pack of, say, I don't know what the going rate is here, but a few thousand messages. So I pay $20 a month, and then I am able to send up to a few thousand messages in that given month. So there's a dashboard, the user signs up, and they enter their payment information, and they pick a plan which they think is going to be best for them, and then they receive the API access tokens, which they can then use within their software applications to interact with the API. Of course, anybody who gains unauthorized access to these tokens would be able to make API requests without the authorization of either of the two parties, right? The API service provider or the person who was granted the access tokens. But at least there's a way for, in most cases, the API service provider and the person who is consuming API services to authenticate to one another using these access credentials. So the person, in order to try out this API, goes through this process to sign up on a dashboard and then pay for services. That is one monetization strategy. For certain systems, and these are generally more user-facing systems that generate a bunch of data, the API can actually be offered for free, and the terms are that when you use this free API, you grant the API service provider access to the data that you generate with the API so that they can use it to, for example, create advanced artificial intelligence models that are trained based on this data, or use it for other purposes, whatever those purposes may be, in a free API. One example of this could be something like at least the research preview for ChatGPT, which was made available in late 2022 by OpenAI. Anybody can use the system for free with the understanding that their use of the system will benefit OpenAI, because the data that is generated will be property of OpenAI, who reserves the right to monitor any chat conversations that go through their API. So these are the two common approaches to API and digital service monetization on the internet as of today. So the advantages here are that with, for example, a subscription-based API where you pay, the API service provider is fairly sticky, right? So from the API service provider's perspective, sticky API is better. It means that people have gone through a lot of work in order to sign up for and use this API, and to switch to another provider, they might lose any credits they may have purchased, any packages of, for example, SMS messages in our SMS gateway example. But the benefits to the consumer of that API are less numerous, I would say. When we consider the cost of facilitating one single API request, generally with these digital services, that cost is very low. Generally, for example, when I send an SMS message, the cost to send that one message might be a penny or less. Of course, if I'm sending 1 million messages, it's going to cost me a lot. But if I only send 1 or 2, the cost is very small. And so there's not really a good way of monetizing this directly in accordance with the value people are getting out of it. There's not really a way of making small payments directly for the use of APIs and digital services. The creation of standards and systems for more effective monetization strategies around APIs and digital services would facilitate reduced friction and less stickiness for digital service platforms. Consider our SMS example. If, for example, one person wants to send one message through this SMS gateway, if there was a standard by which that person could pay a very small amount of money to make the API request, and a standard by which the API service provider could validate that payment and then provision services on the fly as that payment was received, then the API service provider and the person who wishes to consume the API could exchange value in small amounts as required. There would be no need to have a dashboard where somebody has to enter an email address and a password in order to sign up, and then enter credit card information and get an API key and integrate that into their application and provide authentication to the API. And then, of course, there's the consideration that if those credentials were ever compromised, then it would be problematic for everybody. In a system that allowed peer-to-peer direct exchanges of value, small amounts of value, micro payments for digital services over an API, we could define different kinds of APIs and more intelligent monetization strategies that effectively bill people for the value they're getting out of a service without the need to be so sticky and without the need for so much data. If services were able to be provisioned that would allow people to pay per use, I may not need to know what is the number of employees that work at this company who I have to enter all the company's information in order to fill out the company profile on the dashboard that I have to sign up for and give my email and password, and hopefully I don't use the same password for everything. and that way I have my API key and I can use that and it's all linked. I may not need to do that. I may just be able to provide a payment, and then the business can focus on delivering the SMS message, and I can focus on whatever application I'm trying to build rather than dealing with a whole bunch of extra information and cruft that is not necessary. And so having a standard by which digital products and services can be offered that facilitate micropayments is useful in this context. We need a way to exchange these small amounts of value directly. And if we can do that, API monetization gets a lot easier. And there's even APIs, I would say, that exist in theory, but which cannot exist in practice until there is a better monetization strategy. APIs like, for example, the sending and receiving of emails. Right now you have to go through, or messages with individuals. Right now you have to go through with a bunch of domain authentication and a vetting process and everything like this in order to send email to somebody. But if I had an API for delivering email to somebody where I could pay a small amount, would spam make sense? If I'm not creating value for somebody because I'm spamming them, of course my email would still get delivered, but I would spend money as I'm doing this. And because I'm not creating value for them, they don't give me that money back. So does it make sense for me to invest $10,000 in order to send an email to 1 million people, or maybe even only 100,000 people, when 0 or maybe 1 out of those people is actually going to find my email useful enough for me to use my product and service? I mean, that one person would need to spend at least enough money to earn me $10,000 in profit, if that was the case. Then it might be worth an investment. But if we want to reduce spam, if we want to make APIs and systems more in line with the things that people value, if we want to better and more intelligently monetize our businesses and services, then a micropayment-based API monetization system would benefit us in that goal. I have been working on creating various API monetization systems and payment schemes for micropayment-based architectures. Architectures that facilitate this kind of direct peer-to-peer interaction. If you'd like to check out more about that, you can watch some of the other videos here, or you can visit Project Babbage and search up what that is and see some of the things that we've been doing. These are just some thoughts that I have about API monetization. I think that's all I have to say in this one. Thank you for taking the time.